Ah, Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD, General Physician. All my video lectures are mainly for educative purpose. In continuity with the previous lectures on neurology, today we will be discussing on one of the another interesting topic. Very frequently you will see in your everyday practice. You might see in your nearby family or in your family. It will be very useful because it can be asked as a full question in your theory, also may be asked in your oral exam, that is hydrocephalus. The meaning is very simple. Hydro means water. It is actually not the water, it is a CSF. So excess of CSF collection in a cranial cavity we call as a hydro. Hydro means water, cephalus means head. So you can see here there is a huge collection. So the head circumference has increased. Here the person is complaining of headache. And again you can see here the head circumference is big. So this will be classical groups of disorders we call as a hydrocephalus. Acquired hydrocephalus are not so common, but the hydrocephalus which are congenital, they are quite common. As well as in children you will come across hydrocephalus. We'll be discussing under definition, etiology, pathophysiology, clinical features, investigations, differential diagnosis, treatment and complications. Definition I've already told you. Hydro means water, cephalus means head, means water in brain, water in head or water in skull. So if you want to describe that, it is excessive accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid resulting in abnormal widening of the spaces of the brain. This is a better way of defining a hydrocephalus. So excessive accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid resulting in abnormal widening of the space in the brain, and the most common space which is being widened is ventricular space. You can see here the size of the hydrocephalus or head and compare with the body. So hydrocephalus is the accumulation of excessive CSF within the ventricular system. The choroid plexus within the ventricular system produces CSF, which circulates through the ventricular system and enters the cisterna magna at the base of the brainstem through two opening which are lateral, we call foramen of Lusca, and central opening we call foramen of Magendie. The subarachnoid CSF baths the superior cerebral convexity and it's absorbed by the arachnoid granules. Most cases of hydrocephalus are the consequences of impaired blood flow and reabsorption of CSF. Overproduction is a rare cause and can accompany with the tumor of choroid plexus. All form an increased volume CSF expands the ventricle and elevates the intracranial pressure. This is a general introduction of hydrocephalus. If we want to put them into different groups, we divide into three classical groups, that is communicating, non-communicating and normal pressure hydrocephalus. These are the three main groups. So communicating means there is a circulation of CSF from one space to the another, that is from lateral ventricle into third, from third into fourth and from fourth into subarachnoid space. There is no obstruction, so it is also called non-obstructive, and also you can call that as a non-occlusive. So in a short form it is called COH. So communicating hydrocephalus. So communicating hydrocephalus, external hydrocephalus, non-obstructive hydrocephalus, non-occlusive hydrocephalus, etc. are the common word which are being utilized. While opposite of that is where there is obstruction. So obstructive hydrocephalus, or as it is, there is an obstruction somewhere. So CSF cannot flow from third ventricle to fourth ventricle or from fourth ventricle into foramen of Lusca or from lateral ventricle into third ventricle. That's why it is called non-communicating or obstructive or occlusive, or it is also called as internal obstructive or non-communicating hydrocephalus, short form NCH, non-communicating hydrocephalus. And third, where the intracranial pressure is normal, so normal intracranial pressure with hydrocephalus changes, we call normal pressure hydrocephalus, or it is also labeled as idiopathic hydrocephalus. Maybe idiopathic or maybe secondary, but short form it is called NPH. As far as etiology wise is concerned, you can divide into congenital or acquired. Almost all congenital are occlusive, but acquired can be occlusive, non-occlusive. So acquired can be occlusive, non-occlusive and normal pressure hydrocephalus, while congenital are always occlusive variety. There will be some other name also as we come across. So we already mentioned communicating, non-communicating, congenital and acquired group, normal pressure hydrocephalus and hydrocephalus with raised intracranial pressure, and depending upon the onset, acute and chronic. So this will be the way we term hydrocephalus. Another way of classifying is functional, on functional ground, clinical ground, age-wise, pathological, with raised intracranial pressure and special types. So we'll be going through. You can see the amount of hydrocephalus. Functional classification, to classify classical communicating or we call non-obstructive and non-communicating or obstructive variety. So this is functional way of classifying. Then depending upon the clinical ground, high pressure hydrocephalus, which you can divide into acute and chronic, normal pressure hydrocephalus. There is one more word which is being utilized is arrested hydrocephalus, or there is one more word also, hydrocephalus ex vacuo. We'll be explaining you in a subsequent slide. Age wise, pediatric, juvenile and adult onset hydrocephalus. So which starts in adult, in juvenile, pediatric, or ideally we should also mention one more is neonate. In neonate, by and large it is always congenital, and in pediatric it can be congenital or it can be acquired. Juvenile and adult can be congenital or acquired. In pathological congenital, there are few common types. We call Arnold-Chiari type 1, Arnold-Chiari type 2, then primary aqueductal stenosis, secondary aqueductal stenosis because of gliosis, then Dandy-Walker and sex-linked disorder. These are few of the congenital variety. And among acquired, infection, post-hemorrhage, secondary to mass effect, that will be non-obstructive variety. Non-neoplastic, neoplastic, choroid plexus papilloma, post-operative neurosarcoidosis, spinal cord tumors, ventriculomegaly, etc. This will be acquired group. Infection may be post-meningitic, granuloma, cysticercosis, abscess, and among hemorrhage, subarachnoid, intraventricular and traumatic injury. As far as pressure is concerned, high pressure, normal pressure. Special variety, hydrocephalus ex vacuo, meaning there is an enlargement of the ventricle due to loss of cerebral tissue, particularly cerebral atrophy. This will be classically seen in case of Alzheimer's disease or in case of a chronic alcoholics, and there is one variety we call as a Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. Most commonly you will see in Alzheimer's variety. There is one variety we call as external hydrocephalus, means there is an enlargement of a subarachnoid space over the frontal pole in the first year of life. the ventricular size are normal or maybe slightly enlarged. And this is very easily distinguished from the subdural hematoma by cortical vein sign. And this you can see here. There is a collection of a CSF here. And this is a frontal lobe. And this is described as an external hydrocephalus and usually resolves spontaneously by 2 years of age. Etiology exactly not known, so you can put that as idiopathic. There is also one postulation, there is a defect in reabsorption of CSF, and external hydrocephalus may be a variant of communicating hydrocephalus. That is the theory which has been put forward. So either because of CSF resorption is defective, or there is one variety of communicating, it is one of the variety of communicating hydrocephalus. Arrested hydrocephalus means compensated hydrocephalus which has now not progressed. So there is no progress or deleterious sequelae requiring a CSF shunting. And criteria in the absence of CSF shunt. So nearly normal ventricular size, normal head growth, and continued with a psychomotor development. So that you can call that as arrested hydrocephalus, means there is a hydrocephalus compensated variety and there is no further progress. So there is no deterioration as far as psychomotor function is concerned, and ventricular size are very close to normal. So that is described as arrested hydrocephalus. Otitic hydrocephalus means it is secondary due to otitis media or increased intracranial pressure with otitis media. So probably the etiology is secondary due to otitis media. So that is called otitic hydrocephalus. There is one another term called as hydranencephaly. So this is a post-neuralescent defects. There is nearly total absence of cerebral hemisphere, or it is so much thinned out. Intact cranial vault and meninges. Intracranial cavity is almost filled with CSF. There is usually progressive macrocrania, and the commonest conditions is bilateral infarcts, big infarcts, or maybe secondary to infections like neonatal or congenital herpes or toxoplasmosis or equine virus infection in neonates that can produce hydranencephaly. There is one more variety which is being described as entraped fourth ventricle. So also called as isolated fourth ventricle. So third ventricle, fourth ventricle, foramen of Lusca. So post-infectious hydrocephalus very commonly following a fungal infection or repeated shunt infection. Choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle produces CSF which enlarges the fourth ventricle. So there is an isolated fourth ventricle enlargement, and that is also described as entraped fourth ventricle. Now little bit regarding a normal pressure hydrocephalus. It is hydrocephalus signs are clearly present, but intracranial pressure is normal. And this is very frequently associated with three classical signs, that is dementia, gait disturbances we call as ataxia, and urinary incontinence. You will detect that communicating hydrocephalus on CT or MRI. There is no obstruction, and normal pressure can be demonstrable on lumbar puncture or by pressure recording putting a probe in the ventricular chamber. And symptoms will be reversing back with CSF shunting. So as soon as you do a VP shunt, the symptom will disappear, almost will disappear. Person will be close to normal. I've already uploaded one video lecture on NPH. If you are interested to go through in detail, you can go through. The incidence is 3 to 4 in every 1000 birth. It may be congenital because of maldevelopment or intrauterine infection. Among acquired infection, neoplasm and hemorrhage becomes the one of the common etiology as far as NPH is concerned. Now, congenital hydrocephalus usually will be because of congenital defects, and the etiology of those congenital defects will be intrauterine infection. In case of a congenital hydrocephalus, like intrauterine infection, that is rubella, cytomegalovirus or toxoplasmosis, or traumatic injury like subarachnoid hemorrhage, intracranial hemorrhage or intraventricular hemorrhage, or maybe because of a congenital malformation like Arnold-Chiari or Dandy-Walker syndrome. These two are the most common congenital malformation. Or you can have aqueductal stenosis. So these are some of the common conditions which will produce congenital hydrocephalus. Among acquired hydrocephalus, infection comes topmost on the list like tuberculosis, chronic and pyogenic infections, post-intraventricular hemorrhage. Some of the tumors, particularly in a posterior fossa tumor like medulloblastoma, astrocytoma or ependyoma, or AV malformation, intracranial hemorrhage, ruptured aneurysm, etc. And also you can have mass lesion, which is accounting for almost 20% of all cases, and this mass lesion will produce always obstructive hydrocephalus. Majority of this will be producing obstructive hydrocephalus. Infection in the form of meningitis, which can be bacterial or can be tubercular, or also cysticercosis. Then increased venous sinus pressure related to achondroplasia or craniostenosis or venous thrombosis. Very odd condition in the form of iatrogenic may be seen with a hypervitaminosis A, where person is given a large dose of vitamin A or person is consuming good quantity of vitamin A, and that is by increasing the CSF secretion or by increasing the permeability of a blood-brain barrier. And when we can't identify any cause, we put them into a idiopathic group. So we divide into two big groups, communicating, non-communicating. One of the classical example of communicating variety is achondroplasia, choroid plexus papilloma, that will secrete excess of CSF. This is one of the another common variety seen in neonates, benign enlargement of the subarachnoid space, meningitis, malignancy, and post-hemorrhage. As well as non-communicating, the classical example of non-communicating is genetic or right from the birth, like aqueductal stenosis or infection or sex-linked disorders, which can be Arnold-Chiari, Dandy-Walker, Klippel-Feil, or maybe because of abscess, hematoma, tumor, neurocutaneous disorders, etc. One odd variety we have already mentioned before, hydra anencephaly. There will be a massive hydrocephalus and proencephaly. These are different words. Hollow proencephaly, etc. These are the groups of disorders which you can see very commonly seen in newborns or neonates. Obstructive can be congenital or can be acquired. Communicating is most commonly seen in either again congenital and acquired group, and communicating is very frequently because of overproduction, defective reabsorption, and venous drainage insufficiency. I am not going into detail regarding the CSF circulation. We have already discussed. This is a diagram which is showing you all the different chambers, etc., and pathology where it will produce. So you can have at the foramen of Monro, gliosis, colloidal cyst. In a third ventricle, chiasmal gliomas, craniopharyngioma, arachnoid cyst. In the fourth ventricle, these are the different Dandy-Walker, astrocytoma, ependydoma, medulloblastomas. Obstructive defects like arachnoiditis, post-meningitic, venous thrombosis, pineal region can also produce obstruction by pineal tumors, cerebral aqueductal stenosis, aqueductal forking, subependymal gliosis, periaqueductal gliomas, or you can have a basilar obstruction by arachnoiditis or Arnold-Chiari malformation. These are some of the conditions. Among communicating, we already mentioned it can be idiopathic, it can be secondary. Among secondary, because of overproduction of CSF, which is very commonly seen with choroid plexus papilloma, or maybe you can have an obstruction. Sorry, this will be non-obstructive. So you can have other condition which will produce like subarachnoid hemorrhage, infections, neoplasm affecting the meninges, where you will have increased production of CSF, or following a traumatic injury or post-operative. This will be non-obstructive, or we call communicating, or non-occlusive variety, or we call internal. As far as the communicating hydrocephalus, we already mentioned few of the mechanism. Ideally, this will be the pathophysiology, overproduction of CSF, or blockage of CSF circulation. CSF reabsorption is blocked. Hydrocephalus ex vacuo or normal pressure hydrocephalus are the variety of communicating hydrocephalus. Classical example of overproduction, choroid plexus papilloma and choroid plexus carcinoma. This will be by and large communicating variety of hydrocephalus. Blockage of CSF circulation is at the level of foramen of Monro, or unilateral or maybe bilateral, very commonly with colloidal cyst in the third ventricle or tumor of the third ventricle. That will be one of the variety where you will have a partial blockage of the CSF circulation. Dandy-Walker is congenital blockage of foramen of Lusca or Magendie associated with agenesis of cerebellar vermis, more common in female as compared to male. There will be bulging of the occiput. Person will have nystagmus, ataxia, cranial nerve palsy, and there will be no occlusion of the ventricular chambers. This is Dandy-Walker syndrome. Typical Dandy-Walker syndrome. You will see this particular variety where there is a blockage of foramen of fourth ventricle, and this is a congenital condition associated with agenesis of cerebellar vermis. There is a malformation of cerebellar vermis. You can see this particular portion. Collection of CSF. So it is a developmental failure of roof of fourth ventricle during embryogenesis. 90% have hydrocephalus. 90% of this will be, and there will be prominent occipital bone. Poor reabsorption of CSF in a venous sinus is very commonly because of post-meningitic or subarachnoid hemorrhage or cortical vein thrombosis, quite common. Hydrocephalus ex vacuo, we have already explained that CSF pressure is normal. There is a shrinkage of the brain tissue, damage to the brain, very commonly because of stroke or because of injury, and very commonly seen with a neurodegeneration. And this will be classically seen very frequently with Alzheimer's disease. There is also one variety which is called as a Rasmussen encephalitis, which is a progressive hemispherical atrophy of unknown etiology. There is increasing seizures, progressive hemiplegia, smaller hemisphere is abnormal, lateral ventricle is larger than the opposite side. The lateral ventricle is larger in a smaller cerebral hemisphere. So you can see this hemisphere is getting atrophic and this ventricle is getting enlarged. You can see here. This is normal. Slowly both ventricles are getting enlarged. This is normal. Both ventricle. That is described as hydrocephalus ex vacuo. Little description in this particular chapter. Normal pressure hydrocephalus is due to gradual blockage of the CSF, unusual cause for dementia, and usually it is a complication of infection, post-infection or post-hemorrhage. The etiology most common is subarachnoid hemorrhage, post-traumatic, post-meningitic, posterior fossa surgery, tumor including carcinomatous meningitis, etc., and also seen in Alzheimer's disease. There may be a deficiency of arachnoid granulation and aqueductal stenosis may be seen. We'll see hydrocephalus, but pressure, intracranial pressure will be normal. Etiology of hydrocephalus, particularly non-communicating or obstructive, very commonly seen in neonates because of aqueductal stenosis or Arnold-Chiari malformation where cerebellar tonsil protrudes to the foramen magnum, or there is a cyst close to the foramen magnum, myelomeningocele, intraventricular hemorrhage, tumors, cancer, mass, particularly in a posterior fossa, quite common. Among all this, the infection comes topmost on the list. Second common is hemorrhage and hematomas, and then comes congenital malformation like Arnold-Chiari malformation. You can have a congenital hydrocephalus almost because of aqueductal stenosis, which accounts for close to 43%, and male to female ratio is 2:1. So it is one of the very common congenital anomaly. And along with that, you have got the thumb deformities. Prognosis is poor unless you detect very early and treat them, may be benefited. But mortality is almost close to 30%. Etiology of aqueductal stenosis is very frequently because of septum formation defects or forking of aqueduct, quite common. Gliosis of aqueduct is another common. Stenosis of aqueduct is another common cause of aqueductal stenosis. Among extrinsic pathophysiology, which produces the obstruction at the aqueductal, which is a duct which is communicating between the third ventricle and fourth ventricle, maybe because of abscess or maybe because of pineal tumor, brainstem gliomas, medulloblastoma or ependymoma. These are the common, and of these are all by and large acquired groups. Among vascular, AV malformation, aneurysm, or there is one aneurysm which is being described as a Galen aneurysm, or there may be a developmental defect like arachnoid cyst. You can see among the etiology, intraventricular hemorrhage, meningomyelocele comes topmost on the list as far as hydrocephalus in neonates concerned, while tumor, aqueductal stenosis, infection, head injury are less frequent. And you can see, even in spite of a good investigation, it may be almost 11% may be idiopathic. So do remember that. What happens because of pathophysiology? Maybe either because of communicating variety or a non-communicating variety. There is increase in the size of ventricle. This is normal circulation. I have already discussed in previous lecture of CSF circulation. So I am not going into detail. I will be keeping this slide. This is a normal circulatory pathway from lateral ventricle into third ventricle by foramen of Monro, then aqueduct of Sylvius into fourth ventricle, and then fourth ventricle to subarachnoid space by a foramen of Magendie or foramen of Lusca, and then via arachnoidi villi back into superior sagittal sinus. So hydrocephalus is formed because of disturbances in formation, that is increased formation, diminished flow, and decreased absorption of CSF by arachnoid villi. Increased volume will occupy the CSF space in the CNS, and that will give rise to increase in the size of the lateral ventricles or third ventricle or fourth ventricle, and CSF will be accumulated in the cranial cavity, giving rise to raised intracranial pressure. So this excess of CSF is because of either overproduction, or there is a sluggish circulation, or there is a blockage of resorption, or there is an atrophy of the brain tissue in case of a hydrocephalus ex vacuum, or in case of a normal pressure hydrocephalus, the enlargement of the ventricle size is because of increased CSF formation, decreased absorption, and decreased CSF circulation, that is we call sluggish circulation. Three factors are working together in case of a normal pressure hydrocephalus. So excessive accumulation of CSF, raised intracranial pressure, which may be because of any one of these pathophysiology we already mentioned: overproduction, increased resistance to the CSF flow, reduced absorption, and increased pressure in the dural sinuses. So once the pressure in the dural sinuses is increased, person will start having effect of that increased intracranial pressure. But in case of a non-communicating hydrocephalus, there is no obstruction to the flow. There is usually mass occupying lesion, and because there is no communication, because of obstruction, one chamber may be enlarged or there may be bilateral enlargement. While in case of a communicating variety, usually all chambers gets enlarged. Bilateral enlargement is there in this variety, what we call as communicating variety. All chamber will get enlarged. While in a non-communicating variety, there is an obstruction in CSF flow, and because there is an obstruction in a CSF flow, say if there is a obstruction in aqueduct, then fourth ventricle will be normal, third ventricle will be enlarged, and two lateral ventricle will be enlarged. Say if there is an obstruction in a foramen of Monro, then only one side lateral ventricle will get enlarged. So it will depend upon where is the obstruction, and it is very commonly because of mass occupying lesion, which will disrupt the ventricular anatomy, accumulation of CSF, enlargement of ventricles, depending upon where is the obstruction. So absorption of CSF from optic nerve root is being affected, which will give rise to papilledema, and secondary to papilledema you will have disturbances in vision, right from blurred vision to complete loss of vision. By and large, in a case of a non-communicating hydrocephalus, you will have a bilateral papilledema, and also in case of a communicating hydrocephalus also, you will have a bilateral papilledema, very common. Also because of a dilatation of lateral ventricle, you will have an elevation of corpus callosum, stretching and perforation of septum pellucidum, and this will start producing compression of the cerebral hemisphere, thinning of cerebral cortex, and that will affect your neurological function. In third ventricle, whenever the third ventricle gets enlarged, it will start compressing pituitary fossa. This clinoid process, these are the two clinoid process, that will get destroyed. So pituitary fossa will get widened. There will be widening of pituitary fossa, secondary to destruction of the clinoid process, and widening of pituitary fossa will be seen very clearly on X-rays. And third ventricle will be enlarged, which you can see on a CT or MRI. And as the further pressure increases, now cerebral hemisphere will be pushed down and midbrain will be pushed. So you will have either central herniation or lateral herniation, which will be a downward herniation. You might have a push of one of the uncus, so we call uncal herniation, which will be pushing through the tentorium cerebelli, And when you get a push of one side of the brain below the falx cerebri, then we call that as subfalcine herniation or cingulate herniation. So you will start getting herniation, and secondary to herniation, you will start having cranial nerve palsy. You will have pressure effects on different parts of the brain, particularly brainstem, that is in midbrain, pons and medulla. I've already discussed this in a raised intracranial pressure. You can go through. I've already uploaded that video, so you can go through. I've already uploaded even video on herniation, so you can go through that particular chapter. So I'm not discussing in detail. So raised intracranial pressure, cerebral herniation, and neurological symptoms and signs in the form of cranial nerve palsy, particularly third cranial nerve and sixth cranial nerve are most commonly being affected. And you can have pyramidal tract being damaged. You will have contralateral hemiplegia and ipsilateral hemiplegia, depending upon how exactly there is a push and what way the herniation takes place. And worst is tonsillar herniation, which will compress the medulla and produce cardiorespiratory arrest. In a communicating variety, and this is in a normal pressure, in a normal pressure variety, you will come across resistance to the CSF flow, raised intracranial pressure, very commonly, particularly at night, stretching of the ventricular wall, enlargement of the ventricle, and that will produce classical triad we call ataxia. Person will have a urinary incontinence, and because of pressure effect on the cerebral hemisphere, person will start developing dementia. So dementia, ataxia, and urinary incontinence is a classical triad. While in case of a communicating variety, normal flow between the ventricle and subarachnoid space, but there is a defective absorption of CSF, overproduction of CSF. This is very frequently because of intracranial hemorrhage, meningitis, brain tumor, etc., which damages the arachnoid granules, or maybe because of venous sinus occlusion, particularly because of venous sinus thrombosis, superior sagittal sinus thrombosis, or lateral sagittal sinus thrombosis, or inferior sagittal sinus thrombosis, cortical vein thrombosis. Those are the most common cause in case of a communicating hydrocephalus. There is no obstruction between lateral ventricle, third ventricle, and fourth ventricle, and in foramen of Luska and Magendie. So because of accumulation of CSF in a subarachnoid space, atrophy of the surrounding brain tissue, deep white matter structure, and you will have a crowding of sulci. In congenital hydrocephalus, very classically seen in a Dandy-Walker malformation, that is dilatation of ventricle during fetal and infancy period. There is an obstruction of aqueductal stenosis, Chiari malformation, etc. These are the two groups we call Arnold-Chiari malformation and Dandy-Walker malformation, two variety of congenital. So there is an obstruction to the flow that will produce increased production, decreased absorption. So increased production is because of choroid plexus papilloma. Obstruction to the outflow will be very frequently because of clot, tumors, pus, intraventricular foramen are occluded by exudates or by tumor or by blood clots, or there is a congenital stenosis like aqueductal stenosis. And decreased absorption is because of the outflow, and that is obstruction of the arachnoid villi by debris, blood clots, pus, fibrosis, etc., or maybe venous sinus thrombosis. So hydrocephalus results from impaired absorption of CSF within the subarachnoid space, particularly that will end up with a communicating variety of hydrocephalus. And obstruction to the outflow will be very frequently because of non-communicating hydrocephalus. And that is classical example of tumors, gliomas, abscess, a big clot occluding, or congenital malformation like aqueductal stenosis, those groups. Already we have discussed but particularly in a children because of accumulation of CSF. Now ventricle will dilate, it will compress the brain, but if the cranial sutures are not closed, then skull size will enlarge, sutures will be separated. But in children, previously closed suture may also open up sometime because of severe raised intracranial pressure also. And then you will start getting herniation. The most common herniation will be lateral herniation in the form of uncal herniation and central herniation. And you can get cingulate herniation or subfalcine herniation. That is quite common in case of a hydrocephalus. It is more common with non-occlusive hydrocephalus than non-occlusive hydrocephalus. It is more common with that. Now if we go through the symptomatology, in infants and neonates, head size will be enlarged, the circumference will be increasing, it will be more than 98% percentile for that particular age. The sutures will be separated. You can even palpate that sutures are separated out. Scalp vein will be dilated. There will be tense fontanelle or bulging fontanelles. Particularly anterior fontanelles will be markedly bulged out. And you will have a eyeball will be pushed down. We call as a sunset sign or setting sun sign, which will be very common with raised intracranial pressure. Ocular globes are deviated downwards and upper lids are retracted. And you can see the white sclera above the cornea, visible above the iris. There will be increased limb tone because of spasticity. Particularly lower limb will be more affected than upper limb. And some of the symptoms which will be very peculiar, like poor feeding, irritable, reduced activity, vomiting, lethargy, etc. Quite common. You will have a separation of sutures, bulging of fontanelles, dilated scalp veins, classical. So depending upon the patient age, what is the cause, location of obstruction, how long the duration, you will have a symptom signs in infants and in children and adult. In infants, head enlargement, poor feeding, irritable, reduced activity, vomiting. But in children, the what we call is a mental function will be slowed down, headache, neck pain because of tonsillar herniation, vomiting, blurred vision because of papilledema, double vision because of sixth cranial palsy, and you can have even what we call as strabismus, drowsy, person will have limb spasticity, difficulty in walking, that is because of the stretching of pyramidal tracts and periventricular tracts. So in infants, head enlargement, separation of sutures, dilated veins, scalp veins, you can see clearly dilated vein, head circumference is increased, increased spasticity, particularly more common in lower limbs, sunset sign, very clearly seen, retracted upper eyelid, downward deviation of globe, and you can see the white sclera above the iris. So all those things are very commonly seen. Head size is increased, bulging fontanelle, separation of cranial sutures, prominent scalp veins, persistent vomiting, lethargy, irritability, sunset sign, seizures, and delayed milestones. All those whatever we have mentioned. And if you percuss on the head, you will get a crackpot sign, and that is described as a McVeigh sign. And you might demonstrate even an increased spasticity. You will have a clonus and Babinski sign will be positive. And in one of the variety of a Dandy-Walker variety, you will have a prominent occipital bone. Occipital area will be markedly prominent. So papilledema, crackpot sign, large head, unilateral or bilateral sixth cranial palsy. You can see sunset sign, skull size is enlarged. Very common. These are the classical signs almost in all: enlargement of head, bulging fontanelles, separation of sutures, and vomiting. very, very common in neonates. And you can see on fundus examination papilledema. In infancy, you will have a further because of increased tone in the muscle, and because of the poor feeding, you will start getting other signs. And because of increased tone also, you can get even opisthotonus. You can see clearly sunset sign. Enlarged head, dilated scalp vein, bulging fontanelles, sunset sign. So setting sun sign or sunset sign. So these are all classical. Lot of pictures are there. Now, in some person, along with that enlarged head size, macrocephaly, and raised intracranial pressure, there is one word which is being utilized is Perinoid syndrome, that is inability to elevate the eye. Retraction of the eyelid is called Collier's sign. Setting sun sign, dilated scalp vein, and crackpot sign is called McVeigh's sign. These are some of the names. If you remember, well and good, don't worry. So Perinoid sign is inability to elevate the eye. So eyeball is pushed down. You can see this is the bulging of anterior fontanelle and increased skull size. There are dilated scalp veins. You can see these are dilated scalp veins. Sunset sign. You can see the sclera. The eyelid is retracted. And when eyelid is retracted, you call that the Collier's sign. And if you percuss on the head, you will get crackpot sign or McVeigh's sign. So sunset sign, McVeigh's sign or crackpot sign. Even if you throw the light from one side, you will have a trans illumination because of excessive collection of water. So trans illumination may be demonstrable. Bradycardia, hypertension, altered respiration, papilledema. These are very, very commonly seen in neonates. Almost we have mentioned everything. You can just go through in detail. All these are the signs which are seen in older children and adults. As the child grows, some of these signs will persist. And these are physical signs because of damage to brain, particularly to cortex and pyramidal tracts. So cognitive function will be affected. Person can be drowsy, incontinence, blurred vision, difficulty in walking because of spasticity, papilledema, unsteady gait, large head, bilateral sixth cranial palsy, Perinoid syndrome, that is inability to elevate the eyelids, inability to elevate the eyeball, and this will be the typical dementia, ataxia, and urinary incontinence, classical in case of normal pressure hydrocephalus. Classical triad. That is urinary incontinence, ataxia, magnetic gait, it is we call ataxia, urinary incontinence, and dementia. And once you treat, person gets fantastic benefits. So increased reflexes, Babinski sign, slow movements, tremors, difficulty in walking, quite common. Among investigation, transillumination, head CT scan, lumbar puncture, skull X-rays, echoencephalogram. So this is during utero. You can find out that there is an increased size of the skull. You can go for CT scan. So CT is one of the thing very commonly which will assess the size of the ventricle. But to find out obstruction, malformation, tumors, etc., MRI is very, very useful. So periaqueductal, cerebellar tumors, Chiari malformation will be easily identified by MRI. Ultrasound in infants will be helping you to find out subependymal or intraventricular hemorrhage. And skull X-rays, particularly lateral X-ray, will help you to identify the erosion of we call clinoid process or sella turcica or pituitary fossa. We label that. There is no blood test which will help you to identify hydrocephalus. So good number, you can see a big tumor. So X-ray, plain X-ray can help you to identify the separation of sutures, erosion of posterior clinoid process and anterior clinoid process, increase convolution marking, beaten silver appearance on the skull, etc. Ultrasound will be also helpful in utero to identify the fontanelle size, the skull size. CT scan will be helpful once the child is born, CT or MRI, and ventriculography or pneumoventriculography to find out the site of obstruction, etc. You can see here there is a separation of sutures, widening of pituitary fossa. You can see the pituitary fossa is widened out. Pituitary fossa is, and this is silver beaten appearance or bitter silver appearance, separation of sutures. Sutures are separated out. You can see that sutures are separated out. And this is the X-ray showing you ventricular peritoneal shunt, VP shunt. So you can find out the tumors, you can find out the malformation. This will be classically seen in a Dundee walker. So it will help you. CT and MRI will be very helpful, and ultrasound during pregnancy will be helpful. This is beaten silver appearance, classical, very, very classical. We have already shown you in raised intracranial pressure. And CT scan will give you an idea regarding the etiology, where it is, where is the obstruction, what are the other malformation you can identify by CT or MRI. So different types of obstructions. You can see different ventricles are being enlarged. These are all what we call as a communicating, non-communicating you can identify. In non-communicating, by and large, it will be one chamber which will be enlarged, or maybe two chamber enlargement. But in a communicating variety, it will be bilateral enlargement, very commonly of lateral ventricles. This will be more likely to be communicating variety, while this will be more of non-communicating variety, single chamber enlargement. This will be communicating variety. Here you can see one chamber is more enlarged. One side is more enlarged. You can see this particularly. You can see here again. So this will be more of obstruction, or we call non-communicating. Here you can see that this is ballooning of the frontal and third ventricle. It is also called as a Mickey Mouse ventricle. Third ventricle is enlarged and these two are enlarged. So this is called Mickey Mouse. Has to be congenital and obstructive. There is something called as a Evans ratio. I have discussed this in other chapter also. So Evans ratio is greater than 3 or equal to 0.3 defines ventriculomegaly. Means you take this transverse and see the size of the frontal horn, and if this is more than 0.3 of transverse, then it is called Evans ratio more than 3.3. It is in favor of ventriculomegaly. MRI, ultrasound. This is ultrasound during pregnancy. MRI will be very, very helpful to find out the site of the block and probably the etiology of block also. This is sonography showing you enlarged head size. Fetal size is enlarged. Head size is enlarged. Lumbar puncture will be helpful to differentiate normal pressure hydrocephalus. Particularly, it is one of the variety of communicating hydrocephalus. So it will be very, very helpful. And also it will be a therapeutic for normal pressure hydrocephalus. We call CSF drainage. And you can find out whether it is normal pressure or raised intracranial pressure. And then after all investigation, you will have to separate out into communicating, non-communicating, normal pressure, and then with good examination, congenital or acquired. Treatment wise, medical treatment not so useful. It will be useful in very few conditions like acetazolamide and furosemide. that will help to reduce the intracranial pressure. But majority of the people who has got raised intracranial pressure will require surgical intervention like remove the obstruction if possible, like blood clots, tumors, or you can remove choroid plexus which is secreting excessively, choroid plexotomy, or sometime you might have to create a little small hole in a third ventricle. It is called third ventriculostomy by endoscopic procedure. So it is called endoscopic third ventriculostomy. Or you can create a small hole in septum, that is called septum fenestration, endoscopic. Or also if there is a cyst, you can create a hole in the cyst by endoscopic procedure called cyst fenestration. And one of the last resort is a shunt, which can be from ventricle to the peritoneum, VP shunt, from ventricle to the right atrium, VA shunt. And there are other types of shunts also. We'll be showing you those. So third ventriculostomy, VP shunt, ventriculoatrial shunt. Then you can connect ventricle into pleural cavity called ventriculopleural shunt. Then there is one more shunt called Torkelson shunt or internal shunt, and lumboperitoneal shunt, that is connecting from the lumbar space into peritoneal cavity. So that is called lumboperitoneal shunt. These are the different type of a shunt. The most common which is being performed is a VP shunt. That is most common. And another common nowadays which is being done is called internal shunt or Torkelson shunt. So this is VP from ventricle to the peritoneum. This is from ventricle to the atrium. And this is from lumbar space into peritoneum. So it is called lumboperitoneal shunt. And this is most commonly done for communicating hydrocephalus. There is one variety we call as a Torkelson shunt, which is a shunt through a burr hole from a ventricle into what we call as subdural space after doing a craniectomy. This is a shunt which is being created. And you have also done laminectomy. And this is very commonly done for non-communicating hydrocephalus. Also, you can go for choroid plexotomy, choroid plexus coagulation, etc. can be done. And very rarely you can go for endoscopic fenestration, either in the septum or in the third ventricle, etc. This is a diagram showing you the shunt. This is lumboperitoneal. This is from ventricle into peritoneal cavity, VP shunt. This is VA shunt. This is VP shunt. This is into right atrium. This is VP shunt. This is pleural cavity, ventriculoperitoneal shunt. You can see the shunt, how it is communicated. This is the shunt which is being done. And this is ventriculostomy. You can open up the third ventricle into outer space, that is subarachnoid space. So this will be ventriculostomy, and if you create an opening into the septum, it will be septostomy. This is also called endoscopic third ventriculostomy, and when you do simultaneously choroid plexus cauterization, then it is called endoscopic third ventriculostomy with choroid plexus cauterization. So these are the two things are done together. Endoscopic third ventriculostomy plus choroid plexus cauterization. This is third ventriculostomy what is being done, and you open up that into subarachnoid space. This is pre-operative, this is post-operative. You can see the skull size is reduced and person will improve as far as clinical function is concerned. So ventricular tapping can be done. Endoscopic third ventriculostomy can be done. These are all surgical intervention. Choroid plexotomy, choroid plexus coagulation, cerebral aqueductoplasty, repeat lumbar puncture, etc. There are many different procedures. So you can see this is an endoscopic procedure where third ventricle is opened up into subarachnoid space. This is VP. This is VA. This is third ventricle. You will open up into subarachnoid space. So depending upon what it is, you will go for different procedures. Complications quite common: dementia, seizures, delayed milestones, and if not treated early, death. The commonest complication of shunt will be infection and blockage. But because of hydrocephalus, herniation and secondary to herniation, lot of complications. Cognitive dysfunction, urinary incontinence, spastic gait or ataxic gait, electrolyte imbalance, metabolic acidosis, papilledema leading to optic disc damage, and neurological symptoms and signs. Prognosis: increased risk for development disability, IQ will suffer, abnormalities in memory, some patient will show aggressiveness, abnormal behavior, visual problem because of strabismus, because of decreased visual acuity of vision, and field defects will be there. And patient will require a long-term follow-up to see the effect of your treatment. So I end my lecture here. I know this is an exhaustive lecture. So I thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable and I appreciate that you have spent some of the time with me. If you like this particular lecture, please press button like and subscribe, and you can give your expert comment and suggestions so I can improve. If you feel that this will be helpful to your friends, you can share with your friends. So again, thank you all for taking out time. See you in next lecture. This will be very helpful because quite frequently asked in your theory. You will see sometime once in a while the patient in your everyday practice. If you pick up, diagnose them early, treat them early, you can reduce morbidity as well as mortality. See you in next lecture.